I knew I was saving my own life, and that's what it came down to, was a decision that my life also had value. And that's not a message that caregivers receive a lot.
People. Got the people. Yeah. Passion.
Welcome to People, Passion, Power. I'm your host, Jason Martin. Our guest today is a very special individual, Abby Maslin. And thanks for coming on the show. How you holding up with the kids at home, Abby?
Thanks for asking, Jason. We're hanging in there. We're two working parents with two small kids, and every day we're just giving ourselves a pass for good enough.
So listen, you've been telling your story to the world for some time now, and I know it, but I want folks who are watching this now to just take a look and listen in on Abby's story.
I woke up on the morning of August 18th, 2012, and it was just kind of an ordinary Saturday morning, except that I had woken up alone. TC had gone to a baseball game the night before, and he hadn't come home. And so I thought that was strange, but I thought maybe he had, stayed at a friend's house or something. And within a few hours, I got really panicked. And as it turned out, as I found out just a few hours later, he had been robbed and assaulted on his walk home.
Police today are following a number of leads in the disturbing attack against 29-year-old Thomas Maslin.
He was in the hospital after laying on the street for over 8 hours. He had been hit with a baseball bat on the head. But by the time I found all of this out, he was already having brain surgery, and I could not wrap my mind around any of this. TC survived this brain surgery in which they actually removed part of his skull and put it in his abdomen and allowed the brain to swell. And what had happened is he had sustained a traumatic brain injury, but that's a term I was totally unfamiliar with.
I don't recall anything, the walk or anything really the next several weeks after the injury.
I want you to work on dribbling.
And then sort of the physical rehab, which is the ability to swallow, feed myself, walk, and then there's the language part, which is rebuilding my language essentially.
Z.
Yes.
Nope. Try it again. Z.
Oh, Z.
Good. Wow, T. That's awesome. There's this kind of romantic brain injury tale of two people who were in love, and then the brain injury happens and then they fall in love again. And that is such a simplified view on what this really is. I really struggled with feeling isolated. TC was my best friend. He was the person I wanted to call when he got injured. And so not to have a person that could be on the receiving end of my emotional experience throughout it was really, really hard. There was a period where suicide felt like an option because I couldn't imagine a future of sustained caregiving.
I'm just really, really thankful and grateful. I feel like I've accomplished enough that I was hoping for, which is now I'm sort of what else can I possibly ask for? And really, on a day-to-day basis, I just try to pinch myself and be like, wow, I'm so happy to not just work, but family and my children and my health and all that. I just try to be in the present moment and really absorb all the positivity that I'm surrounded with.
I really hope other caregivers will take away the importance of being kind to themselves, of just relieving some of the pressure that they might be feeling externally, and of being really honest about their own needs. I think it's really easy to fall in love with somebody who says all these wonderful things about you and makes you dinner and buys you presents, but when that piece is removed and it's not about how that person makes you feel, it's about who they are and what you respect about who they are, you really learn to see them a lot more clearly.
So when you released the book last year, tell me about the feeling of releasing the book. I know you told me the other day it took you 6 years to put it together. Was it a feeling of relief to put that out into the world?
Yeah, I think as a memoirist, I was living by a rule that I had set for myself, which was that I was only going to tell stories that were already complete for me. And so, I was encouraged very early on after TC was assaulted to write about the experience and maybe even to publish a book. But the reality was that we were still very much living through it. We had so much to overcome and so much to figure out and so many chapters that lie ahead. That the idea of putting it out, anytime in those first few years just wasn't possible. And it probably wouldn't have been a wise idea because at that point, I hadn't had the time to really reflect on the experience and what I had learned from it and try to mine all that wisdom from it. So putting it out last year was really beautiful because we had just begun this lovely chapter of, reconnecting in Capitol Hill. We had lived here for many years and then moved away to Maryland and discovered we really missed our community. So we had just moved back. Our kids at that point just thriving at 8 and 2 years old. And so it was interesting to be putting out a book which contains stories of a much more difficult period of our lives, but one that felt very far away at that point. And that's why it felt okay to be so honest and so raw in the storytelling. It's because I did have some time and space to process that for myself. And it's been really amazing in that time to connect with people who have either been through an experience like ours in terms of brain injury or have been through any kind of grief or loss experience who have connected with the story and the way that I've told it. I wanted it to be an outlet of honesty because I think so many of us, when we're in difficult situations, are told, you're so strong, which then puts this pressure on us to just kind of grin and bear it. But the reality is that we are humans who need each other. And so it was really lovely to be able to connect with all the readers during this past year.
Was it a sense of relief? Like, you wrote the book, but how many times have you read the book after you released it? Do you go back and look at it and just learn from yourself?
0 times. Actually, the only time I have read my own book all the way through is when I recorded the audio for it. And that was such a fascinating experience for me because I had, spent years just sitting over these pages and correcting and revising and driving myself mad in the process. And to actually read the words aloud was such a powerful experience. It was sort of like ripping off this last Band-Aid or this last layer of skin. And I felt completely exposed reading it, which was what I was going for. I was going for a vulnerable storytelling experience. But that in itself, I think, I wouldn't call it a relief, but it was very therapeutic to read those words.
Yeah, and I've watched enough of you on YouTube now. Can you talk a little bit about the person you were before the injury, and then the person you are today?
Yeah. I mean, brain injury is such an interesting experience because we often just talk about it in terms of the brain of the person who was injured and how that brain changes, right? But for me, this was a true transformational experience that rewired my brain. Before TC's assault, I was living a pretty happy, sheltered existence. I really hadn't come up against anything that had caused me to question my place in the world, who I was, and how I was spending my time, which in itself was kind of nice because ignorance can be bliss. I was really just appreciating those moments of being a young mother. My son Jack was almost 2 at the time, but I didn't have big dreams for myself. I kind of had just decided in my head that there were roles that I was meant to fill, among them wife and mother and school teacher, and that would be good enough and that would be fulfilling enough for me. This experience broke open everything. And it caused me to question how I had been identifying myself. And it caused me to see that I was capable of so much more than I had given myself credit for. But probably the biggest thing it broke open for me was the gift of time and the realization that I was going to get this one life. and I had to be so much more deliberate in how I spent it. So whether that meant deciding, there were things I hadn't tried that I was going to try, like writing a book, or just learning to be incredibly present in every moment, with my family, in nature, in every moment of the day, it's really shifted the way I value things. And so I wouldn't say I'm a totally different person, because I think I was a pretty nice person before.
Sure.
But I think right now I'm a person who questions things in a bigger way, and who really, I've been empowered by the resilience that it required to get through this. And so even in a moment like now, where we as a nation, as a world, are facing something that's incredibly uncertain, I'm facing it with the knowledge that I've already gone through some dark chapters. And this too will be something that passes, and that we are all made of the ingredients to get through it.
Are you, this is maybe a strange question. Are you happier now than you were before the injury?
That's a good question. There's research that suggests that we are all kind of just born with this natural inclination toward happiness, that it kind of, lives on a spectrum, and at birth we're kind of placed somewhere on that spectrum, and we orient ourselves back to that place. And I do buy into that theory a little bit. I think for me, I am now so much more aware of what I have and the gifts in my life, which makes me happier, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. In those weeks that TC was in the hospital and it was uncertain whether he was going to live through it, I would go back into my mind, into this trip that we took shortly before his assault, when we went to Italy for a business trip of his. And we really had no money. So we were not staying in fancy places. We were not eating at fancy restaurants, but we brought ourselves there and we made it happen. And I just would continue thinking about the moments from that trip as if that was, something that I couldn't have appreciated in the moment, what a trip like that would mean. And now I get to be in the moment and know exactly what it is that I'm looking at, right? So I'm not looking in the rearview mirror to say like, wow, I should have really been happy I got to do that thing. Now I'm living it, and I know. And sometimes that feeling is so overwhelming, you really don't know what to do with it. At least I don't, because to know how much we've been given in this life feels like an overwhelming responsibility sometimes.
Was there a day, was there a point in time, was it a process? Because I can hear it in your voice, and I see how you are processing it. Like I get it. And how did you get there? When did you get there? How did you get to where you are today? Because that mindset of where you are right now as you sit today is unique. And I imagine, I don't know, I'm just curious about how you got there.
Yeah, I mean, there is this concept of post-traumatic growth. And it's not a concept everybody buys into, but I buy into it from the perspective of every major upset in our life causes transformation, right? And so we're going to emerge from it one way or another. For me, there was a lot of dark moments before I got to the place where I could really reflect on the experience the way that I do now. I would say though that it begins right away. It begins the moment that your life shatters and you look around and you start to process everything differently. From small things like, oh, I didn't realize there was a tree growing in my front yard. Like all of a sudden you're just cognizant of all these things that were right in front of you the whole time that you couldn't see. For me, I feel like the biggest moment of transformation, or the biggest transformational experience for me, was when I took myself to Greece 2 years after TC's assault. And in those 2 years, TC had gone through major rehabilitation, from not being able to walk or talk to being at the point where he was almost ready to start going back to work part-time. I'd also lost my father during that time, and I was just very shut down before I made that decision to go take care of myself. I saw what I was doing, which was putting up all kinds of layers around me to protect myself, putting up all kinds of armor so I wouldn't have to be hurt again. I was lucky to be aware of that because I saw what I was doing and I saw the way I was closing myself off. And I made this decision that the thing that was helping me the most during those moments and during the entire experience was movement. And so I took myself to Greece to do a 200-hour yoga training. And that, was a privilege in itself to be able to leave my family for 3 weeks. There was a lot of coordination around that. But I knew people would have questions about why I would do that, why I would make a decision that may have appeared from, the outside to be kind of selfish. I knew I was saving my own life, and that's what it came down to, was a decision that my life also had value. And that's not a message that caregivers receive a lot, no matter what kind of caregiver they are. There is a very strong message that caregivers are noble, and that, it's an honor to take care of somebody, and that you just, again, need to take it on the chin and just deal with it. But that just never felt true for me. I knew that I deserved human connection. I deserved time to pursue my own interests. I knew that my life didn't end the day of that assault, and I still had an obligation to myself to live it as big as I could. And so that decision to go away for a few weeks was really the break I needed to reset and come back into my life with a new attitude about how things were going to go from that point forward.
I sense something here, and you hold on to a tiny bit of guilt about that trip, maybe. And you use the word selfish, and I think of a way that's like, selfish is so not the right word. There's a better word to describe it, but like, to be the best version of yourself so that your family could reap those benefits. That's what you had to do. That's not selfish. That's actually, they're the beneficiaries of that.
They are, and I think I was anticipating a lot of other people's reactions to that decision, which was nothing I really needed to burden myself with. At that point, I had read a lot of books by women who had saved their own lives. And I knew I wanted to be that kind of woman. And so I was willing to do it no matter how people thought about it. But with the recognition that from, an outsider's perspective who didn't know the chapters of life that I had just lived through and survived, that it could appear, a certain way. But yeah, I think women, and I think women caregivers in particular, shoulder a lot of guilt about any decisions that are in service to themselves, when you're absolutely right. You have to take care of yourself before you can take care of somebody else.
So, did you ever think you'd be an author? Did you ever think you'd be the person you are today? Like, was this somewhere in the back of your mind a long time ago, a vision at all, or it evolved?
It was always a vision.
Okay.
It's interesting. I loved to write as a kid. And then it's very interesting because I'm a teacher now in DC. And at some point, after enough assignments from enough teachers who just had a very specific idea in mind of what kind of writing they wanted to receive, I turned it off for myself. I was like, oh, writing is not fun anymore. I'm not going to do it. And so I just didn't identify as a writer. And then over the years of, being in my early 20s, I was like, I would really love to write a book one day. I'd had all these kind of wild teaching experiences in different urban school districts. They were very eye-opening. I thought one day I'd write a book about that. I don't know if I ever would have gotten around to it though, Jason. I think I would have just given myself a pass. And I know lots of other women who are sitting on dreams like that. Lots. And, TC's assault was such a wake-up call for me. It was just the reminder that even though it didn't happen to me specifically, I didn't know what tomorrow would hold. And I couldn't walk around with the arrogance that I would get another chance at pursuing this if I didn't do it now. Writing a memoir is very therapeutic in a way. It's an opportunity to make sense of something that, in so many ways is just totally senseless. But I'm so glad that I finally kicked my own butt into gear and got around to it. I learned a lot again about how capable we are, how we can make time for things if we really are oriented to making something happen for ourselves. And I needed that kind of wake up call.
What's the main lesson you learned about yourself?
That's a great question. It's so hard to boil it down, right? Here's the main lesson. Okay. I am responsible for my own life. I know that sounds kind of basic and maybe obvious, but I think when you're in a situation where people are very, prone to calling you a victim of some kind, where you feel like you don't have control over what happens anymore, the reminder that you own your life, you own all the decisions that you make from that point forward, for me has been the most important lesson. It's the lesson I want my kids to know. Because at the end of the day, it is you. Things will happen to you. And that's what life is. Life is just a series of things getting thrown at you. It was never meant to be anything else. It was never meant to be some version of perfect, but your choices and your responses to what happens are what define you.
Mm. What's your spiritual side? What's your faith like? How does that look and sound and feel?
It's a smorgasbord of faith. I'll tell you that. I don't affiliate myself with a certain denomination. I am a very spiritual person. I pray a lot. I believe in something bigger than myself, and I guess that's the best way to define it. I actually believe in all of us. I believe in all of us together, that we can make things happen that are really powerful. I saw that with TC. I, had this instinct to pray right away, and that is even before I knew what had happened to him. And then when it seemed like he may not make it, I asked people who I knew to pray for him at a certain time. And that ended up being hundreds of people around the world who prayed at a certain time for TC. And I felt it. I felt that moment in such a hugely life-changing way. And so I think I just like to have the humility to say that there is something bigger than me, and I don't have to define it to believe in it.
I saw something this morning, and it made me think about you, and I don't know if it describes it well or not, but it said, I'd rather go to hell for you than go to heaven without you. And instantly you popped into my mind. I'm like, I'm just going to run that by Abby this morning.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Feels about right. But regardless of your faith, I think you went through, you probably went through hell. And I know you went through hell, right?
Yeah.
And that's such a hard word, but there's probably not a better word to describe it. But
there's not. For me, hell is loneliness. And I think for a lot of us, that's true, that our biggest fear is actually being alone. And so the experience of being married to somebody who can't interact with you in any of the traditional ways, can't speak to you, can't hold you, can't understand you. I mean, because really at the end of the day, we want to be understood so badly. It was such a lonely experience. And my parents were both ill at the same time. So I felt like I was really without anyone who could understand me. And that is a lot of people's hell. It was my hell for sure.
You're so strong, and you're an inspiration. And I think you sharing your story and your message to the world is powerful. So thank you for that. Tell me how the book is going, what you're up to now. Just talk to me about it. I mean, the book was released about a year ago. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, it was released in March 2019, and I was so fortunate to have great timing in terms of being able to go travel around the country and talk about it. And I'm, feeling deep empathy for a lot of authors right now who have books that are coming out this spring who don't have that opportunity. It allowed me to meet a lot of people I wouldn't have met otherwise, who have helped me kind of spread the word about the book. And I think right now, as I try to manage homeschool and distance learning and all of the other things, my goal is really to continue spreading stories, my story and other stories. I think that stories are what get us through moments like this. When we read about other people's hell, their own version of that, and how they walked out of it, I think that's how we find the strength and the inner wisdom to know what's right for ourselves in these moments of uncertainty. So I'm doing a lot of reading right now. And I hope others will too. I think we're really going to find a lot of solace in stories.
The book is called Love You Hard by Abby Maslin, and you are authentic, you are genuine, you're sharing your story, and you're putting good out into the world. And for that, I thank you, Abby Maslin, and I certainly appreciate you being on the show. People, passion, power. Write another book. Go write another book for us. How about that? Book
I
number
will get around to that too.
Okay, while you're homeschooling and carrying on your normal job and going through these tough times we're in, just go write another book.
I think I might.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate you.
Thanks, Jason.
It's just people, passions,